The following discussion is not necessarily the views of all involved. The goal is to start open and honest discussion in the Christian worldview. Like all things, weigh what you hear with what you know and join us in our pursuit for the truth. Enjoy the podcast.
I'm going to have to bleep that out. You've made this joke every single time.
And I'm going to keep making it. Are there Nephilim still around?
I want to say yes,
Well,
right?
if you say yes, then it has to be the Dutch.
Just because they're tall.
so tall.
Welcome to the Second Rate Saints podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Caleb. Just kidding. No, I'm one of your hosts, Joel, filling in for Caleb as our usual intro guy. And to my left
I'm Kole, and to my left.
I'm Joshua. To my left.
is Joel again. Yeah, we've only got the three of us today, but we've got Kole on his second episode.
Yeah, I'm with Caleb and Colton.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
he's our fill-in for Caleb and Colton not showing up. And your second episode, but also our 80th episode, which is something that's pretty cool. We've been doing this for a little while now. We
20
got a
away
bit of
from
a
our live
backlog.
show.
Yeah, next week is our live. No, I'm kidding. We're not doing a live show. It's not a thing. But if you do want to see what we're doing online, check us out at secondраtesaints.com for our weekly episodes, as well as our blog posts, book reviews, and probably some other projects that we're going to be greenlighting in the next little while. If you'd like to support the future of Second Rate Saints financially, you can check us out at buymeacoffee.com/secondраtesaints to contribute to whatever this little mission is that we've been doing. I'd like to thank our listeners as well for engaging and commenting on our videos. It's been actually a pretty cool couple of weeks responding to different questions, comments, and concerns. Let's start off this episode like we typically do by asking the age-old question, what have you read, to our friend Josh here?
I honestly don't know what I read.
Oh, well, we're starting this off great then.
So I read a book called Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman.
Is that, it's got anything to do with Between Two Ferns, Josh?
No, you've made this joke every single
And I'm
time.
going to keep making it.
Are you talking about like the Zach Galifianakis one?
Yeah, the one with Zach
Or the one where
Galifianakis.
they killed a dog?
There's one where they kill the dog?
Yeah, it's like an old movie.
No, we're talking
Which I
about
think is an
this book,
adaptation of a
not
book.
Between Two Ferns.
Okay, all right, so carry on. About Between Two Ferns.
It's an epic tale of medieval horror. So
Aren't we all?
So the way this book, what's cool about this book is it's portrayed kind of as like it's a fantasy of the Black Plague in 1387, which is but the fantastical element is the idea that it's not just the disease, but that the disease is caused by hell trying to retake heaven. So they have to attack Earth and humanity, and then they're waging war on creation again.
Okay. And they do that through pestilence and disease.
And war.
And war.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so but the story revolves around a excommunicated knight who's now just a criminal, a bad priest, and a young girl who's been orphaned, who is listening to angels guide her on what she needs to do. And these two protect her while she needs to get from Normandy to Avignon, which is the city of the popes in France. Yeah.
So you said it's a fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Got like a bit of a quest, or it's got a range of odd characters coming together. So is it just like a road trip journey of them running into a bunch of obstacles?
It's almost like, C.S. Lewis's Pilgrim's Regress.
Yeah.
You know how now we're in a castle.
Oh yeah, where things just kind of happen.
Yeah, it's that, but just a little bit less surreal.
Okay.
Where it's like, there's a monster, there's this, they're on the river. It's a road trip, but it's odd stuff happens because you're starting to see the ethereal break into reality. And so it's messing with reality.
So with C.S. Lewis's Pilgrim's Regress, that was famously an allegory where he's referencing very clear philosophers and thinkers and ideas, and he's trying to help you understand his argument through the lens of literature. Is that the same thing here, where it's just an allegory?
No, but what's cool is, I don't know, like, I'm going to say this, it's not professionally written, because I just found this on Amazon. I just thought it looked cool in the description, and the story was cool. But it's not written the best, but there's the point with the allegory that's cool is it's not analogous, but there's a scene where a character's watching a demon and an angel fight over this town, and it's massive, like a tornado, right? And it's destroying this village, but he realizes that what he's seeing is not what's happening. That this event is so grand and so apocalyptic in nature that it is best understood with this image. It's not actually what's happening.
So is this written from the perspective of like an alternate fictional history, or is it, this is informed by the mystical religious view of those actually going through the Black Plague? Because there was some of that, right?
Yeah.
Where, the thought that the Black Plague had something demonic to do with it was
Exactly.
not foreign to the mind of individuals going through that. So this is not saying this is if the war in heaven actually did affect the Black Plague, this is saying like the view of the Black Plague from the perspective
people.
Of the that's cool.
And
I like
so
that. Rather than making like a fantasy world from scratch.
But it's also similar to the biblical narrative in that there's some stories, like the Book of Chronicles and the Book of Kings is a good example of this and proof of this. It's the same events, but you see the author of the Book of Chronicles lays over theological themes and images and stories on top of the events of just the kings being evil. Right. And so here's what happened, and here's how you're supposed to perceive the event theologically.
So when it comes to this book, is this book a sermon in the guise of a narrative, or is this just fiction that plays with Christian themes that could be edifying to the believer?
It's like Paradise Lost. It's fiction,
Christian fan fiction.
Okay. But there are sections that are written like the Bible. And it's when it drops into the overarching story, and it's written like Job, where it's like, and now all the demons gathered together in hell.
It reads like King James.
And it reads like King James.
Okay.
And it's and so it's like, that's cool. It's extremely vulgar, and it's extremely the demons are extremely blasphemous in what they do. They make sense for the medieval description of what demons do. But it is sometimes it gets heavy.
So it's not a sanitized Christian read per se.
No.
It's got a little bit of edge.
From what you've read of it to me, I would put a disclaimer on this book.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
This needs
brutal.
an ESRB rating that says X.
So what's the name of the book one more time?
Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. The guy does a great job, but he writes some things that I would have been like, nah, I can't write that. That's blasphemy.
All right. That's a neat book. Well, hopefully someone checks it out.
There's some.
What do you think of that cover, dude?
Oh yeah, we got to do that.
Oh, I think this is a 3.5.
What?
Yeah. Reading the book, like, this is one of the main characters. And it's
Can you describe who's on the cover there?
so on the front cover, what you see is a French knight, but instead of a person, it's a skeleton covered in armor. And it's Between Two Fires in Gothic font, like on old medieval
like New York
codexes.
Times font.
No. This is the same, like, like the old tapestries where they have like the crazy first letter.
Yeah.
It's that style.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then but yes, New York in the like New York Yankees sense.
Well, like that, the T for the two there, that looks like the T on the New York Times logo.
Yes. But it's a red background because hell and all the evil stuff. But it's this image of Thomas, the main knight, is super deep in its relationship to the story. And so.
And because it's super deep, it only gets a 3.
3.5. Yeah. Yeah. That's why you're like, what?
I like that cover. It's good.
I think it's tasteful.
Yeah.
I think it would be not. I hate it when it looks like it's made by AI, and that doesn't look like AI.
No. This looks, it's good. And on the back, you've got a skeleton riding a lion.
So
it's one of the main villains.
So if you're a history nerd and you like the Bible, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are both, give the book a try. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's that.
Cool.
Yeah.
We have a topic for today. We decided to actually decide what we were going to talk about before the podcast started.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this one because this week we're going to be talking about the Nephilim. And the Nephilim, if we're lucky, is going to be a topic where we tick off everyone. We make up everyone a little bit upset.
And then I'll round it off at the end so it doesn't just annoy people.
No. My job is to make this difficult. Because that's how we know it's the truth.
No.
Yes. If you leave this without being angry, you didn't learn anything.
Okay. But before we get too far, hey, Joel,
what?
In general concept, what do people think of when they think of Nephilim? Just in case there's someone listening to this that doesn't know.
Well, I do think there are giant issues with that.
That's a stupid joke.
That's such a dumb joke.
When they talk about the Nephilim, they think of the first occurrence there in Genesis 6:4 that just kind of stumps the reader, and they're like, "Hey, angels came and slept with the daughters of man. That's pretty weird." But then there's kind of several different connotations to that. It oftentimes gets co-opted by conspiracy theorists to prove weird Stargate and alien theories.
Yeah, the Nephilim are kind of like the closest thing the Bible ever gets to demigods in a Greek sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, where they're part man, but then they're part something else that's a little bit more divine almost.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna do something today. We're gonna break down some of the verses that talk about the Nephilim. We're gonna talk about some of the theories, and then we're gonna talk about some of the conclusions that people make and some of our own thoughts as we get into other more obscure references. So real quick, I thought we would just list off really shortly and briefly the 3 general ideas about what the sons of God are, because that's where the conversation starts. Because Genesis 6 is where we start with the sons of God saw the daughters of man and they found them attractive, and so they slept with them. So the sons of God is where we start, and we have 3 different thoughts. The first is that the sons of God is a reference to the descendants of Seth. Seth being the 3rd son of Adam and Eve.
Boring.
Yeah, that one's not very exciting.
Well, wait. Let's ground it. The argument is that, like, for example, King David is referred to as a son of God. Throughout the genealogy in St. Luke, it goes, Jesus was the son of this, was the son of this, was the son of this person, was the son of God.
And so the sons of God is in reference basically to mankind as a whole.
To the faithful. Because Cain's family is traditionally not held as the sons of God as the descendants of Seth.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so there's that. The second theory is that the sons of God are angels. This is probably the most common that people have, that they're divine beings that left their ordered position in heaven because they saw some pretty women.
Or for some other nefarious reason.
Sure, yeah. Like maybe they were cast out of heaven. I don't know. The third, which is the one that a lot of people start to go into once they start doing word studies, is that the sons of God might be references to heroes, to tyrants, and to kings in that age of time. They'll often refer to people like Gilgamesh from the epic.
Yeah.
They'll say he's referred to with quasi-supernatural language as something a little bit more than human. He's kind of like a demigod. Same thing's going on with the Bible here. These are just really powerful people in their time. Yeah.
And those are just 3 of the most common. Like it splinters off quickly.
Yes. For our discussion, we're going to keep to these just because, well, we'll get into why, but keeping conversation simple, and these are the most easy to discuss. Everything else just gets weird real quick.
But that's where I want to be.
I know. I want to be there too.
You can't talk about it. And here's the thing. I already feel like we've crossed wires a little bit saying the sons of gods and the Nephilim are the same thing.
Yes.
Because that's a huge presupposition to the text.
Well, he said that the sons of God are angels.
Yeah.
And that the Nephilim are not, the descendants of the sons of God.
So we're going to get into that because some people have different ideas about how sons of God and Nephilim relate. Some people say they are related. Some people say they aren't. But we'll get to that in a few minutes probably. Okay, so continuing with the idea of the sons of God, there are 5 verses that reference them in the Old Testament. We've talked about one already. There's Genesis 6:4. And that's the one that we've talked about where they saw the daughters of man. They went out of their way to be with them. God got mad.
Yeah.
And when we start talking about the New Testament, that will become important. But right now, it's talking about how that's something that the sons of God did, though let's presume that we don't know what sons of God means yet.
Yeah. But it should be known if we're going to be reading the Bible that the 120 years is not reference to the human age, but it's how long from when God makes that statement to the building of the ark.
Yes, that's worth pointing out.
Yeah. It's not a human age cap because, like, for example, there's a woman down in Mexico that died recently. She was 124. So
yeah. That's one of those things that's important to point out because that can cause confusion.
Yeah.
Even though the year specificity, it's not actually super important to the Nephilim situation.
Yeah.
But
that's actually an argument we got into the other day, right? Is if the Nephilim were the reason for the flood in the first place, if that was part of the corruption.
Yeah.
Which if you read the writings attributed to Noah, which are definitely not Noah, it would say that he was the last one who was pure, which then makes the flood narrative kind of genocidal and weird.
Well, it also, like, the argument then is that God is rooting out genetics that don't match what he created.
Well,
then
it does
also
lean
it
into,
removes it breaks the message of the text, which is Noah was seen as righteous, but not because he did anything, but because God is righteous. It's the same thing with Daniel, where everybody goes, Daniel was faithful. No, it was God that was doing everything. So.
And whenever we start talking about ethnic genocide, that's usually a weird topic to get into.
We'll leave that for the invasion of Canaan.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because the Nephilim, spoilers, are kind of involved in that. But okay, so that's Genesis. The next references to the sons of God specifically is in Job. Here, I'll read out because there's 3 verses. The first is Job 1:6. That goes like this. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. 2:1 says something similar. Job 38:7, which is at the end where God is now speaking, God makes reference, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And so it's making this reference to sons of God being heavenly. There's something a little bit more going on there where it seems to not be referring to the sons of God as people who are on earth, or at the very least who are not regular men. So it seems to discount the idea that they're descendants of Seth, and it seems to lean away from how they are great men.
Yeah.
The last major reference is in Daniel 3:25, which is probably actually written in Aramaic, which could be interesting how you look at it. But it says this, he answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. And so again, it's referring to him not as just a great man, a powerful man, a man of stature. It is divine. And so as far as the Old Testament is concerned, if we're looking at it holistically, it appears to be that reference refers to spiritual beings, which means that in Genesis, when it talks about the sons of God being with women, we are talking about spiritual beings.
I'm going to counter that a little bit.
Okay,
if that's
go.
cool. So in the Job passage, that one works. Son of God, awesome. When we get to the Daniel passage, I think when he says son of the gods, He uses the plural there, maybe, depending on the translator. But I think it should be plural, because I think when he says one like the son of the gods or sons of the gods, Nebuchadnezzar is actually appealing to his own nature as well, that he believes himself to be part God, right? Just by nature of being a Babylonian king.
Which is not unusual for kings to do.
Well,
It's the way that they would have basically achieved their rulership to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar would have been, anyways, believed himself to be a son of God.
That's because the kings of all the other nations are Anunnaki.
Cool. Awesome. Love that.
Hey Josh, that's a big word. What does that mean, Anunnaki?
So the Anunnaki
Is a type of alien. Anyways, next question.
No, the Anunnaki was the name for the Sumerian pantheon of gods. And it was also a term used for the kings of Sumer, which the Sumerians was the culture that predates the Babylonians, that the Babylonians come from. Same with the Assyrians. They come from Sumer.
Well, Sumer was one of the first recorded civilizations that we actually know of.
Yeah. But all of the ancient Near East kind of bounces off their culture.
Yeah. And I think Abraham was from there.
He was from...
Because in the Bible, it's called Shinar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shinar is where the Babylonian people who are Semitic come from, because Shinar is a region within the Sumerian total control.
Okay, I understood it to be synonymous. Like that. That was the Hebrew term for
like you could say that.
Yeah.
Like it totally works in the same way that saying like Judea is synonymous with saying the nation, that the people of the Jews, like the nation of the Jews. Right. Or Israel, even though Israel only pertains to the northern 10 tribes sometimes. Yeah. Right. So it's one of those things.
Depending on the era. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that word messiness, that's only going to get worse as this episode goes on, as we talk about the Rephium.
Yes. And so, but the Anunnaki, again, it's both the pantheon. It's also the name for the kings of Sumer, and then it becomes like a term that conspiracy theorists use, where you'll see these videos where people go, Noah's actually talking about the Anunnaki. You know, it's like because the Bible is a translation of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Anyways, and then
which read either one of those texts and you'll figure out they're not the same thing.
That Noah's actually Gilgamesh is the best thing ever.
He'll be in the Pushteen at the very most.
Noah was also 14 feet tall, right?
Yeah. And so the Anunnaki are described as being giants who are the sons of gods.
Okay. So sorry, did you have anything more?
Oh, that's also why like they claim the pictures, like if you've ever watched Prince of Egypt and like the Pharaoh's picture is taller than everybody else's. Like all that stuff, or like why the Gilgamesh in the inscriptions is always like bigger. But anyways, if you read the Enuma Elish, he's between 15 and 18 feet tall. But I double checked that.
Did you? The Enuma Elish or the Epic of Gilgamesh?
In the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Weird.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing that. Cool.
Okay. So anyways, that being said, we've gone over really quickly the only substantial verses to the sons of God in the Old Testament.
Well, there is also, because you brought up the passage of the stars, the morning stars.
Yes.
There are there's one passage where the verse in Isaiah that people go with, that's Satan being referred to as Lucifer. He refers to him as a morning star.
Yeah.
And so,
which would again reinforce the idea that there's a spiritual element. Like these are spiritual entities or objects being compared.
Yeah. And it's the crossover between like the whole idea of like the stars control you, of being like the heavenly bodies that dictate the world. And so that's why when in Job again, when God says like, who placed the Pleiades and the Orion and the Little and Big Bear, right? It's just like, I put those stars there and you think they rule your life. And so it's again with that same image of stars and angels, of being these heavenly bodies that have a level of control over the world.
Right. And that kind of comes up later because Paul might be trying to address some of that perception of how active the demons and all that get. Yeah. But okay, now That's it. Let's talk a little bit about the New Testament. Now, cards on the table, I'm going to be referring to stuff by a fellow named Dr. Peter Gentry. He did a great video you can find on YouTube where I'm going to pull this from. I think it's by Southern Seminary. You'll find it pretty easy. It's got like 4 million views. Okay. One of the first references that he pulls up in the New Testament that talks about the sons of God is in 2 Peter 2, verse 1 through 10.
Mm-hmm.
Peter's talking about sin, and he's talking specifically about the sons of God and Gomorrah. And so he does something where he takes two pairs of things, and he compares an instance of God's judgment followed by an instance of God's salvation, and then he does it with a second example. So I'll read it from verses 4 through 9.
2 Peter what?
2 Peter 2, 4 through 9.
Okay.
So, for if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. What is interesting here is that he's comparing 2 instances of judgment followed by 2 instances of salvation. Instances of salvation are for those who are righteous. The instances of judgment seem to be concerning those who are in some way related to sexual immorality. Here, it's very clear with Sodom and Gomorrah. We all recognize that that's very often affiliated with sexual sin. In the 2 Peter passage, it refers to the angels having sinned, being cast out from heaven, being put into chains. When you look at the Genesis passage with Sodom and Gomorrah, though, it refers to the sons of God and their sexual sin. And so there's something going on there, which is an interesting comparison.
So you would say that from 2 Peter's point of view, it was the angels coming down for actual intercourse.
And it should be known that there is a little note in everyone's Bible over the word angel there.
Yes.
Which ties to Jude 12. And Jude 12 says, "These are the hidden reefs of your love feast as they feast with you without fearing, shepherds feeding themselves waterless clouds, swept along by winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead, uprooted." And then in verse 13, "Wild waves of the sea casting up foam of their own shame, wanderless stars for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever."
See,
recalls them stars.
Yes. I like how you brought up Jude, because that's the second point that Peter Gentry actually brings up.
Yeah.
So I'll go through that quick, and then we'll get back into a more free-flowing discussion. So this is Jude 6 through 7, so just before that portion.
Yeah.
"And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the day of judgment." So we're hearkening back to 2 Peter, or it's similar.
Yeah.
It's the same idea they're working
Same with verse 12.
Same with verse 12. Verse 7, "Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire." So again, we're conflating the sons of God, who are angels, to Sodom and Gomorrah, who indulged in sexual sin.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, again, the New Testament does not seem to look at the sons of God as mighty men, nor as the sons of Seth.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone want to jump in there?
Which is a bummer, because it's really hard to accept a purely supernatural reading of that text.
Yeah.
It really challenges. Yeah.
It doesn't need to be purely. It doesn't need to be a purely supernatural reading.
And I think we should save that for a little bit later.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think Peter Gentry is actually on that train of thought as well. But then we'll talk about why I think Peter's conclusions get a little bit shaky after a while. Okay, counterpoints. So one of the things that people will often bring up when they talk about the sons of God is they will look to like Matthew 22:30. "For in the resurrection," this is Jesus speaking, They neither marry nor are given in marriage, but they are like the angels of heaven. Mark has almost the exact same reference.
Yes.
This whole idea is that the angels don't reproduce. They don't marry. Except, here's the thing. In the verse, Jesus refers to like the angels in heaven. If we look back to Jude, it references how they have left their positions. They're no longer in heaven, they're on earth. Or at the very least, they're cast down in chains and they're somewhere where they are waiting for punishment.
Jude and other passages would hint at wandering.
Sure.
That they're willingly moving around. They're disobeying.
They're disobeying and they're engaging in sexual sin.
Well, maybe.
Currently? Is that what we're saying?
No.
Actually, you know what? That'll come up a little bit later, I think.
Yeah. Maybe.
Or maybe that's why they've been cast into eternal chains.
Yeah, isn't that something? We always think of this idea of like Satan rising up against God because he was proud, but maybe he just saw a pretty girl.
No, Satan's not involved.
No, I suppose not.
Wait, are you saying that Satan is one of the sons of God mentioned there?
Not strictly. I'm just saying when people think of angels, they'll lump him in, at least initially, oftentimes.
Here's a question that kind of comes up in my mind all the time. Can't stop thinking about it. This happens pre-flood, but then there are mentions of the Nephilim post-flood.
Oh, yeah.
Which means one of two things. Either it's still happening because the flood didn't deal with everybody. Or no, sorry, it's still happening, which is how we're able to have Nephilim after the flood. Or second, it wasn't a worldwide flood, which is much more likely. Yeah.
Or
it was a known worldwide flood.
So are you proposing that possibly there are still demons copulating with human women?
Again, it doesn't mean that they're the ones copulating.
Okay, so this is where Mr. Peter Gentry. Here, actually, I'll continue with his two theories. So we've talked about the sons of God. Now let's talk about the Nephilim a little bit. So he points out that in Genesis 6, the language could be vague enough where you could look at the reference where it says, let's see, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So theory one, they were children of angels. This is the Nephilim and women. This theory pulls from Enochic traditions, he argues, where Nephilim were interpreted as giants.
Yes.
Very commonly understood idea. Theory number two, before angels and humans copulated, the Nephilim were already there. They were there before, and they were there after. So the Nephilim are distinct and they're not actually related to the sons of God. That is the idea that Mr. Peter goes with.
I mean, I always think of them as connected because it's like the verse doesn't do a good job, at least in English, of distinguishing itself from one another.
But like Peter and Jude, they connect these two stories together, Sodom and Gomorrah and the flood. And that's where those two areas of the text are where you see the references to Nephilim.
And Peter goes so far as to say that what Moses or the Pentateuch writers were doing is actually really interesting because he's talking about this idea of the sons of God, the mighty men, like how there's this spiritual thing going on, but the great men that you have in your world are not divine. These Gilgamesh-like figures that you believe you have in your history, these god kings who keep towering over you, they are not godly. They are not from some higher order. They are still man. Your God is different. He is set apart. Which, that's a compelling idea.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's the term used? Like demythologizing?
Demythologizing. Right? That's what Mr. Peter used. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like it, and it fits with the polemic ideals in earlier Genesis, but I don't know if you can just read that onto the text.
Yeah.
Well, right. I disagree with his final approach. I disagree with everything he did up until this point. I agree with everything he got. I think he's coming to the wrong conclusion about what's being said.
Mm.
But I think that requires a total Bible look on the purpose of different genres, including myth in the first 11 chapters.
Yeah, because the part that we're going to get into shortly is the historical books of the Bible, because we talked a lot about Genesis and Job and Daniel, which are prophetic books. They're the Pentateuch, which is kind of its own thing, especially in those first 6 chapters. And we're dealing with poetry.
Yeah.
None of those are dealing with history. And there is a difference in how those books are written.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I think that's where you get kind of they're just demon children. That's straight from like a more literal, you could say, fundamentalist reading.
Sure.
But I do think it lacks the nuance of the text. It leaves a lot in the pot.
Yeah.
Yep.
You guys want to jump in with anything more, or should we go on to the historical books?
I guess we'll talk about this in the historical books, but why are they so closely associated with giants? Because it's not just Enoch, right?
No,
you'll notice if you have a Septuagint handy, right?
Everyone pull yours out,
and maybe this is because in Greek myth things like giants aren't uncommon, right? So there was when they were translating the Septuagint, still in Babylonian exile, if I'm correct. Because it's like the 70 or whatever get together, they write the Greek version of the Old Testament.
The Septuagint they write in the intertestamental period. Because
so it's still post-exilic, but there's very much a Babylonian influence because it's post-exilic.
Yes, it's post-exilic, but it's the reason they're writing into Greek is because the world that Israel lives in now has been Hellenized.
Yeah.
So it's been taken over by Greece, and so Greek culture and Greek language is taking over. And so because Jews are being born with Greek, because they recognize that, like with the exile, people were being raised, and then when they got out of the exile, their kids couldn't read the scrolls. So they had to put in the dots and the dashes to make the vowels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't modify the language. But these guys said, well, what if we translate it into Greek? And everyone went, and then these guys did it anyways.
I wonder if we translated the Bible into English from Latin.
So the word for Nephilim there is just giants. Like that's...
Well, and that's what's funny, because Michael Heiser goes a different direction, but that's...
Well, that they're not giants.
No. That the word for Nephilim is, yes, people go with that it's giant, but that it's actually it related to an Aramaic word that means fallen one. Anyways.
Like, I agree.
Yeah.
Like, I agree with that reading. I'm saying when they translated the Septuagint, rather than find a more suitable word for Nephilim or create something new that meant fallen ones or whatever. Yeah. Because I'm familiar with that theory as well.
Yes.
They threw giants in there.
Well, and that's because of the post flood events.
Yes.
Which describes them as being really tall.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I forgot there's one point I want to make before we get back into the Old Testament. So this is Mr. Peter Gentry again. He points out in 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 4 and 4 verse 7. Paul makes references to things that are very specific, specifically genealogies, quarrels, and myths. And he's telling Timothy to not let people partake in these because they're not beneficial to the faith, and people who continually keep falling into them and like they want to keep having debates about genealogies, there's something wrong with them and they're not truly part of the body of believers. Mr. Gentry puts forward that this might be a response into many other things, partly Enochic traditions that were very focused on the genealogies of things like demons, where they all hailed ultimately from Satan, and that Satan had a disproportionate amount of control over their lives, playing into mysticism, playing into the power of mythology, and into this fixation on the sons of God. And so Paul, even in the New Testament, could be trying to pull people away from bad understandings of the Nephilim, of the sons of God, and all that kind of stuff. So maybe the case, not obviously though in Timothy's.
Well, it does relate to all his other discussions, specifically in Colossians about authorities and rulers and thrones.
Yes.
Because he's not talking about like a king, because he'll just talk about a king. When he talks about authorities, rulers, and thrones, he's talking about the the spiritual forces that people believe have control over the things around us, the way the world works and people. And the whole book of Colossians is Paul saying, hey, you guys are doing great, but you live in a synchronistic society that worships all authorities as great. And you are called to worship Christ, who is above all of this. And that's why he goes on that long resume of why Christ is the best. But, firstborn of creation, firstborn of the dead. He's in him, through him, and by him, all things are created, like all that stuff. And under him are all authorities. Like all authorities are under him. And it's that whole idea of him saying like, hey, there's people there's weird, like, because the Colossians were falling into this, like the city of Colossae was a syncretistic mix of like Gallic, what's the term? Like shamanistic beliefs, with Roman gods and Jewish, like Solomonic, like weird angelic mysteries, which relates to that stuff, and like how all there's just worshiping everything, and it was a mess. So,
dude, Paul's so good.
Well, I think of that genealogy thing. I just want to kind of tie it into the current day a little bit better. If you follow kind of weird cultish stuff that happened in Pentecostalism with a guy named what's his name? Oh, I had it and then I just lost it. The guy who had like the angel behind him. What was it? William Branham. William Branham. Yeah, he believed he could speak to this angel that was with him all the time, which I thought was interesting. Anyways, this was a split off cult in like the 40s, as like he was the last prophet. It was a whole thing. But one thing that he did that takes advantage of the Nephilim kind of theology, Josephus mentions it as an alternate point of original sin, right? And so he pulls something out of that, and then he comes up with something called the serpent seed theology, which turns out to be a wonderful bludgeoning tool of racism that he uses. Yeah. As well as not even just racism, just like if someone disagreed with him, he could say, you are the son of Satan. And he did this by taking this sons of God and reading that back onto the creation narrative, then seeing the snake as a phallic symbol, essentially, right? Which is terrible. Like it's a terrible reading. But then creating two lines, one group of people from God and one from Satan, right? Both having Eve as their mother, which is dangerous, right? So then he kind of had this thing where he had this angel with him all the time that would tell him whether this person was of the serpent seed or of God's seed, right? And so if you ever see that theology pop up with serpent seed, again, it's somebody abusing the theology of the Nephilim.
It's that, but it's also, it's misunderstanding. Like there is, like with all of these bad ideas, right? Like there's a level to which they're highlighting something that the Bible is getting at that is loosely, vaguely telling you something.
Sure, like so that's ballpark federal headship theology.
Well, no, you've got the two you've got Genesis and you've got Jesus saying the same thing, which is in Genesis, in the curse, you've got the descendants of Satan will fight the descendants of Eve.
You have the lambs versus the goats.
Yeah, and then you've also got Jesus saying, no, your father is not Abraham, your father is the devil.
Yeah.
Right? And so you've got that same way of discussion, but he's talking about like where like if you are of God, if you are within the kingdom of God, you are an adopted heir of the throne, in the same way that like if you're a rebel to Christ, which is how a sinner is described, then you are within Satan's influence, as the apocalyptic image shows that it's like Satan messes with the kingdom so that they oppose God's people. But that doesn't mean you're genetically attached to the serpent. Yeah. And that someone could be able to be like, you're of the devil, kill him.
My question is just, do you think he really did hear something?
Oh, I believe there's something demonic going on with William Branham, but that's only in my reading of his stuff.
Do you think it was the same angel that was messing with Muhammad?
You
mean Moroni?
That's a fan fiction we need to write.
Yeah,
boy,
it'll get us killed. But
we just got the false prophet cinematic universe.
The FPCU.
Just it's like those Smash intros where all of a sudden like Joseph Smith joins the brawl.
And it's just him like deadlifting a golden book.
Okay, back to the Bible. Continue.
Okay, let's talk about the Nephilim now, because we talked a lot about the sons of God. Now, fun fact, the Nephilim are in the Bible, and some of them even do things.
And they are in fact tall.
Yes. Yeah, that is one of those things. Some of
Over
them
6 feet tall.
you could maybe get away with a few references being, it could just be a reference to their, political stature, social stature.
Yeah.
There are others where it's really hard to do that. So there are 3 major Nephilim groups two that are really easy to identify, and one where there's a really good case to be made for it.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, we have to actually start with a fella whose name is Anak.
Mm-hmm.
So Anak is first referenced in Numbers 13:33, and it goes like this. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers. So we seem to them. This is the spies that go into Canaan and report back to Moses and all them.
And Josh and Caleb say, we can take them.
Yes. They're like, we can do it. Everyone else sees something that scares them.
Because they're carrying grapes the size of ladders.
Yes. Well, and there's something to be said here where they went in there, and Israel has fought battles at this point, and they've won big battles too. But they go into Canaan and they see something that scares them, and they say, we're not going in.
Even though God said, I'm the one fighting for you.
Yeah. So it's building up to that point where something's bad over there. So that's kind of like cool in a cinematic sense. So Anak and his descendants are all treated consistently as formidable throughout the scriptures. In fact, there are points where it says, and this guy was from the Anakim, Anak's line, and he was killed by this guy at this time at such and such a place.
Yeah, one of David's descendants, one of David's mighty men kills a descendant of Anak.
Yeah, those come up later too, and we're going to talk about that. So the Anakim were scary. There's references to them in Deuteronomy. The Anakim were not the only Nephilim, though. Deuteronomy 2's got a really interesting reference. This is verses 9 through 11. And the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab or contend with them in battle, for I will not give you any of their land for a possession, because I have given Ar to them, the people of Lot, for a possession. The Amim formerly lived there, a people great and many, and as tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Amim. So we're getting to this point where now we're seeing some words getting thrown around. They mean the same thing. So we got to talk a little bit about Rephaim, because Rephaim overlaps with Nephilim, but it means something different sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So Rephaim has 2 general definitions. The first one, if you take a look online, you'll see people often refer to them as saints or something equivalent to that, where they are the revered dead. Not necessarily a moral comment necessarily, but they're revered dead. The other translation, the other meaning though, is giant. So it is again emphasizing this point that the Amim, the Anakim, these are big people and they are scary. Okay. Rephaim is also used sometimes in reference to other giant peoples, it seems, but we're not going to get too far into that. Now, we're going to get into some ethnic stuff now, because this is Joshua 11:20 through 22, where it seems to be the case that the Lord wanted to destroy the Anakim. Now, this was an act of judgment. So to be clear, this is not a case to be made concerning ethnicity necessarily, but this is a judgment over a group of people that are being identified in a certain way.
And it could be that they were led by those people as well.
Yeah, there's something to be said about that too.
It's the same. It's the whole conquest of Canaan and the destruction of those people because of their sin and judgment by God. God says, I am leading you to go do this because when you become like them,
Mhm.
your enemies are going to do what you're doing to them, to you.
Don't forget.
Don't forget.
Don't forget. So this is
Yeah.
Joshua 11. For it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be devoted to destruction and should receive no mercy, but be destroyed, just as the Lord commanded Moses. And Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction, but their cities, there was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain.
Which should be known, those are the Philistines.
Those are the Philistines. And specifically, there's a very important Philistine that comes from Gath. Do we want to spoil it?
He's the one in exile. We've already done an episode on him. It's called
Yeah.
The Champion of the Flies. Check it out.
Yeah, that's such a cool name. I'm so glad
It's
of that
very
one.
cool.
But yeah, he'll come up later.
It's Goliath.
Yeah.
I feel like we tried to do the big reveal and then we forgot to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Anakim have fled. They're now living with where the Philistines are going to be, where they kind of already are. Anyways, so the Anakim have their own cities. They have their own kingdoms probably then, and they're chased out. They're given judgment. So they're not a good people, at least not
Yes.
yet. At least not then. I
And
should
it's
say.
because of their religious practices and their beliefs and their blah, blah, blah,
Mhm.
that God finds abhorrent.
Yes.
And maybe worshiping a half demon man.
Yes.
Anyways.
Okay, so I have one more point, and then we're kind of done with the Anakim. So one of their cities is important because some things happen there. So the city is Kiriath Arba.
Mhm.
Now, sometimes the city is not referred to as Kiriath Arba. It is sometimes referred to as Hebron. Hebron is very important to the Jewish history. A lot of important stuff happens there. But specifically, Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried in Hebron. And they are buried there before the Anakim are chased out. The reason this is important,
They're buried there before the Anakim are there.
well, so that's the thing. So Arba, according to Joshua 21, who's another fella, he is the father of Anak. So he's probably a Nephilim. And he founded the city.
Mhm.
And so if we're talking about the city being founded by a Nephilim, Sarah was buried there first, and then the rest of the family was buried there afterwards. Now, one of the things that gets a little bit messy there is that the Hittites seem to have been in control of this city, of Kiriath Arba, of Hebron, during the time of Abraham, or at the very least, they were
Mhm.
prominent. Abraham had to talk to them. So maybe there's a connection there. Maybe the histories don't quite line up with the people's.
At this point that Joshua's moving in, the land of Canaan is now a vassal, roughly a vassal of Egypt, because they defeated the Hittites out of the land.
Yes, that's also a good point to make.
That's a scene that happens in the beginning of Exodus, Gods and Kings.
That's.
Yeah, it does, but that's not.
Yeah.
I'm glad that movie's good for something in this one very limited case.
But yes, so they eliminated, they removed the Hittites from that area.
I do just think it's wild, just in concept, that Abraham saw the Nephilim and he's like, that's a good, we should buy land there and bury ourselves there.
Or they weren't there.
Sure, yeah, or they weren't
Yeah.
there.
I mean,
Or the Bible's not concerned with the.
Genesis clearly was not concerned with pointing out if they were or were not. I don't.
Well, or if both stories are, if either story is accurate for a certain specific reason.
but it becomes very important when Joshua conquers Canaan.
And that's what I
Like,
mean. It's like the Genesis might not care,
Mhm.
or Moses might not, if he's the one that's writing both Genesis and, well, no, he's not the author of that. So Moses seemingly doesn't care
Mhm.
about
Mm.
if this city is controlled by them.
No, as far as the author of Genesis is concerned, the only point of Nephilim that are worth pointing out is in alongside the sons of God and with their sin. I don't think there's ever another reference to Nephilim explicitly in Genesis. Okay.
Yeah.
We got 2 more people groups, and that's the end of what I have here, I think.
But Cole,
sorry.
that is a very if you're going with the literalistic approach, of course, and that's why God in Romans let humanity have their evil desires.
Ooh. So that grace may abound further, right?
No. Genesis 1.
Okay, we're getting into some weird territory where you're like,
Romans
anyone
1.
God kills is a Nephilim. And that's not what we're doing.
But vessels for destruction.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, vessels created for destruction doesn't mean the Nephilim.
well, but the devoted for destruction line is also that has to do with that is a thing set for judgment, but is also then seen as a type of sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
That's a better reading of that. Yeah.
So
I'm glad you corrected my intentionally bad.
yes. So like when something is devoted to destruction, it's using that same phraseology for like when a lamb is devoted to destruction for sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, they all serve the glory of God.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the Anakim. That's their city, Kiryat Arba. Let's talk a little bit about the Amim, because there are a few references, and then we'll kind of move on to the one that's more interesting. So Genesis tells of wars between city-states, and some of these city-states seem to be either comprised of or led by Nephilim. This is in Genesis 14:5, where it talks about how there's like a war between King Chedorlaomer and a bunch of kings under him. He's fighting a bunch of other kings, which include like the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Amim. So again, we're talking about the Amim and the Rephaim as 2 distinct people groups,
Yes.
both of which are referred to as giants.
Yes.
So some weird stuff. Okay. There's another possibly ethnic cleansing of the Rephaim, or there's another purge of their people groups. We see this in Deuteronomy 3, where it refers to a king named Og, who is the last of the Rephaim. Behold, this is from the verse. Behold, his bed was of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits its breadth, according to the common cubit.
Otherwise known as 13 feet long.
Yeah, big.
Yeah.
So,
And like 8 feet wide.
but I mean, a 4-foot midget could sleep in that, right?
That is the defense of the idea.
That's a wild defense. You don't need to be
Also-
big to sleep in a big bed.
So like it could be a matter of wealth and him just saying, look how big my bed is. It's
But
made.
he's at least not 14 feet long.
He's not 14 feet. So this isn't like hard evidence that he has to be 13 feet.
The reason to point out the size of his bed is to point out the size of him.
That's the thing. And that seems to be what
It's
Deuteronomy's
not
getting
just
at.
this dude has an iron bed.
I do love the
This
idea.
dude's balling. Check this out.
Can you imagine being known as Oog of the Iron Bed? That's
It's
good.
like the old wrestler in the WWE, the Iron Sheik.
The
Oh,
Iron
yeah.
Sheik? What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Last point on Rephaim, and it has to do with this Og guy again. So Og was such a formidable figure, apparently, that Joshua references him as well. Not just in the Pentateuch, it's also in Joshua, on a historical book. And it notes that Moses had seemingly targeted them and intentionally tried to drive them out of the land. Note that the Hebrews did not completely drive out certain populations, but they did with the Rephaim.
Yes. It's difficult though, because there's multiple times in the Old Testament, specifically the conquest passages, where it's like we eliminated everybody died.
And then
it's
there's
like,
one.
and then they didn't. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing as like when a basketball team like gets it's like 7-3, and it's like we crushed them.
Oh, sure.
And it's like it's political propaganda for a war passage.
Now, one of the things is that I can't think of any Rephaim that show up after the Joshua passage.
There is, I think, one reference with King Solomon.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was in 2 Samuel or something, wasn't it?
There is stuff in Samuel, yes.
Yeah.
But
But
those
that
are,
has to do with Saul. a little bit more.
Yeah, and those get a little bit into our last group here.
Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, so we're now going to talk about Goliath, who's probably the most famous Nephilim in the Bible.
Okay,
Yeah.
the argument that he's a Nephilim at all, though.
Yeah, there's something to be said about that. So let's talk about Goliath. So he is from Gath, which is a city in Philistia,
Mhm.
which, as we have mentioned, the Anakim fled there after being driven out. He is 6 cubits and a span, which roughly translates to about 9.5 feet. So when we talk about how Goliath is tall, it's not a metaphor. It's not a reference to social stature. He's big. Everyone recognizes that.
And people would disagree on how tall exactly. Like Josephus records him as 6 feet tall.
Yes.
6 feet tall, though, for 1200 is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And then you also have things where it's it doesn't matter. I'll keep going. Okay, so talks about how he's big, he's scary. It also makes a very specific reference to some of the things that he carries with him. One of the most notable is that it describes his spear. In 1 Samuel 17:7, it says, the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Now, this is important because this exact description shows up in a bunch of other places. Now, the first one that we have, besides Goliath, is another guy named Goliath. This Goliath is named Goliath the Gittite.
Mhm.
He is also from Philistia. And he's also killed, but it's notable because he's such a man of great stature that when he dies, they feel it's important to let people know, here's who did it.
Yeah.
After that, there's another man whose name is Lami. Lami was the brother of Goliath the Gittite, and he also wielded this great spear, and he is also killed, and it makes a whole big deal out of that.
And then there's the champion of Egypt.
The unnamed Egyptian, yes, who they don't care about. They reference who kills him, I think, but they
Benaiah.
Benaiah. They
One
don't
of
talk.
David's mighty men.
Yes, but they don't talk about his name, and besides the reference to Egypt, they don't say what part of Egypt he's from.
Yes.
So they don't care.
However, the Philistines had a notable war with Egypt, which almost collapsed. Well, it was the Bronze Age collapse.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the Philistines also are the ones with all the giants
Yes.
at this point in the story. And so it makes sense that this unnamed Egyptian might have been a...
Well, then you get into other things where like the sea people were likely from from Greece, basically, or at least from north, came through Greece. And so were the giants from them, or were the giants in Gath in Philistia, and they went to the sea people when the sea people were moving in, and then they met each other. Then they were like, hey, we like each other.
Which already Goliath is a term for exile.
Yeah.
Which means he might not have been native to Philistia at all.
Yeah.
Which is more proof for this.
Well,
Hey, did they bring giants with them, or were they just hanging out when they got here? So,
because then does it refer to the Ammonites as
giants?
Amorites?
the Amorites. I
Yeah.
think the Ammonites is Oog as a reference to them, but I don't think
Eug.
Oog. I don't know how to say the Og, probably.
Yeah, because God refers to in Amos that the Amorites are generally very tall and strong. And I believe if we go to Samuel, we covered a character. When he becomes king, when he fights, where is it? Oh no, it is the Ammonites. Nahash. Nahash of the Ammonites, not the Amorites.
Doesn't Nahash mean death?
No, Nahash means serpent.
Serpent. Oh, right. Stinker.
Because he fights Satan in the wilderness after his anointing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is like
Wow.
Jesus.
Very messianic thing to do.
Okay. So the unnamed Egyptian, clearly the authors didn't care about where he hailed from, his tribe, his people, whatever. It does make reference to the Gittites, though.
Yes.
So if you look, you'll find that there are other Gittites in the Bible. In fact, there's two other big name Gittites, and the first one is named Obed Edom, and this is in 2 Samuel 6:10. So for some context, David is taking the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, gets shaky, tips over, guy comes over, he tries to stop the Ark from falling, guy's struck dead because he touches the Ark. David is messed up because of this, and because he's frustrated, he's confused. He's like, why would this happen?
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel it's right to bring it into the city of Jerusalem, but I just can't leave it here. So he looks over and he sees that there's this nice plot of land, this nice, well-preserved, goes over there, and it's this fellow named Obed-Edom. And he says, will you hold the Ark of the Covenant for me? He says, sure. And then his land is blessed because he takes good care of it.
Yeah.
This Obed-Edom is a Gittite. And so if the Gittites have a pattern of being these giant Nephilim, does David go and find a Nephilim who is in exile, seemingly in Israel? He's not in Philistia. He's in the enemy country. And he's the one that's given the ark.
I don't think it's intentional that David knows that that he's a Nephilim. I think it's a redemptive statement.
Yeah, and that goes into the last Gittite.
It also serves my perspective on as you get closer to, as you get away from the mythological pre-chapters of the flood and you get closer to Christ, you get more and more of a, not realistic, more and more of a literal approach to events. And so you get demystified as you go along. Anyways.
Okay. Yeah. Just like a demythic kind of view.
Yeah, but what it's doing is it's translating the mythical view of this idea to the realistic view. Like with all things in the Bible, there's this presentation of this is what the people understand this thing to be, and this is what God's leading them to through progressive revelation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
one last person with one last series of events, and then we're kind of done with what I have for notes here. So the last Gittite that is referenced, his name is Ittai. So Ittai is really interesting because he is a commander of other Gittites, 600 in fact. Now, he comes into the story later on when David's son Absalom is effectively running a coup. He's kicking David out. David doesn't want to fight, doesn't want to beat up his son. He's like, okay, fine, I'm done. I'm just going to go away. I'm going to go into exile. So it's this whole big thing. And then out of the city, as David's leaving, other people go to follow with him. One of these people that goes to leave with David is Ittai and his 600 Gittites. And David says, basically, you're already exiles. You don't need to come with me. And Ittai says something really interesting. So I'll read David's line and then I'll go to Ittai just for the context because I think it's beautiful. So David says this, you came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go, I know not where. Go back and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. But Ittai answered the king, as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives. So he's referring to God and David.
Yep.
Wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be. Ittai is there, this maybe Nephilim-like figure, along with these other Nephilim. They're not with their people in Philistia. They're with David, and he says, we choose you, we choose the Lord. And then we have that redemptive element where the Nephilim, if they were Nephilim, these people, were not naturally evil in a way that is unlike humans.
Or, again, like this idea is that what a Nephilim actually is, as the Bible is presenting it, is not something that is a hybrid of a human and something else, but it is speaking to the state of the person spiritually.
I mean, that doesn't account for physical attributes, but yeah.
Yes, but again, you're as you're moving to this later passage, the physical attributes of what this Nephilim is dropped.
Yeah.
No, that is true. It does diminish to the point where the only references to them are in almost theological terms entirely.
Well, and that's what I mean is just like with many of these things are then sees like Satan is referred to as a serpent. Is he a serpent? like
It could be great big
right,
dragon.
the garden is referred to as the central location in creation. That is this beautiful garden where all the rivers flow from. But then Israel's described as a garden. Then the temple's described as the garden. Then you are described as the garden.
It's keeping a
Right.
common type across all these images. Sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's showing you that there is a truth that the image is presenting. Not just that the image real or not.
I think the problem with that is that if the Nephilim were strictly that, it's like a theological type, it seems more reasonable that it would have been more consistent. Because there are times where like the names are getting thrown around. There's too many references to them having very discrete physical qualities to them, to the point where it seems to be drawing attention away from the theological point and more to something else.
In a culture that believed that the kings of nations were giants that were descendants of gods.
Sure, and like clearly,
Whereas
clearly,
now
but-
you have David, who is a son of God,
Hmm.
who is not tall,
yeah,
who is not.
which could
Yeah.
be playing into the Genesis demythologizing
Yeah.
of the great kings and all that.
And so that's what I think is that like because like you've also got this idea of God saying like, hey, the gods, I'm doing this to judge the gods of Egypt. And then you get to Paul who says, we know they're not there. Right. And so it's like God is speaking the language of the people at the time, but that would require like, I'll get through that when we get through the evidence, but unless we're done.
Well, that's all that I did from my notes, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you got, Joel?
What do I have for notes?
Yeah.
Honestly, I read through Cole's notes beforehand, and it touches on the most important parts. I
Mhm.
think that both you and I've read Michael Heiser.
Yeah.
He does a very similar thing where he blames almost the entire cleansing of Canaan on a rooting out of the Rephaim and the Nephilim.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times my interest in the Nephilim is more conspiratorial than historical.
It's so interesting, though, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like it's brutally interesting, right? Because what you have is something that kind of mocks the incarnation, you know,
Sure.
something that is antithetical to it, right? In the same way that Adam's failure as a king and as a sub creator is a failure that is redeemed in Christ. There is also this unholy union that is redeemed by a proper holy union, by somebody who is fully a son of God and a son of man.
It
Yeah.
is interesting to frame it that way, where it's
Mhm.
the one act of creation that God did not permit nor intend.
Well-
if that's the framing
Well,
of it.
and that's where you get the Nephilim being demons, right?
Right.
That
Well,
not
the-
necessarily. The fallen angels are demons, sure, but there is almost a subclass of demon that is the Nephilim, based on the fact that there was no intention to create them, and therefore they cannot have an eternal home, and
That's the idea.
that's why spirits are disembodied, and like there's these different ideas.
Why they
right?
want to be bodied, and the demons that possess the guy, and then Jesus casts out, and they're like, "Can you send us into the pigs, please?" Is because they want to be in a body because they haven't been in a body in a long time.
Right.
Yeah,
And
which is
that
a bad
their-
idea.
Their
I think.
creation was kind of this spiritual self
Hmm.
that was tied to a mortal body, and it gets weird, right?
Which-
That's
which-
the
Which breaks the whole understanding of sovereignty presented in
Yes.
the Bible.
Mhm.
Yeah. I reject that
Yeah,
entirely. But
as
it's-
one should.
And if
Yeah.
you start running into like the hereditary implications of salvation and sin and all that sort of stuff,
Mhm.
it just gets weirder and weirder. And then all of a sudden you have generational sins that have to be unbroken by incredible amounts of
And then
intercessory
that's
prayer.
why you have to ask the question of if the Nephilim were actually giants, amalgamations of hybrid human angels, right? That actually existed, that the Gittites was an actual, that there are certain people and ethnic groups that have more Nephilim blood than blah, blah, blah. Then you have to actually consider, like, we can trace how much, like, for example, I will have a certain amount of Neanderthal DNA in me.
Sure.
Right.
Mhm.
That means that we will be actually able to tell, oh, you're half demon, you're 23% demon.
Oh, and then you could get into like really weird ethnic stuff, or like that people group from that region, they're more demonic than the rest of us.
Yeah. So you run into
This is serpent seed theology.
Yeah,
This is-
exactly.
No, it so is.
Yes,
we
so that's
accidentally
the-
made it again.
Well, no, that's the problem. Of if you go that the angels actually had kids with people, that when the Bible's talking about Nephilim, but again, the Bible could be in the flood narrative and in the conquest, it could be saying that. But that does, because that's how they viewed the world, and God is operating within their view of the world.
Which is why when you get to New Testament narrative, it has so much more to do with the position of their hearts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? That they are given over to their sinful desires.
And why in those passages it connects the mythological tale with the actual historical event of, hey, there's this mythological thing with angels, and then there's some people doing weird sex stuff in Sodom. And it's saying this is the same thing.
Yeah. Which is kind of the conclusion you can come to, is that if it is not actual union between angels and man, that there is something to be said about the marital union being threefold, right? That there is God and then the man and the woman, right? And they are unified under God. So then what happens if this union is unified under something other than God?
And I think that's why it specifically says in the Genesis 6:4, when the sons of God entered women, in the same way that when a demon enters a person in possession.
Okay. Yeah.
It
makes more sense than trying to make a genetic argument for it. I've also heard genetic arguments for the Neanderthals being the Nephilim.
Yeah, it's
and
dumb.
it just being it's so dumb. It's
They heard Nephilim and Neanderthal and went, they both start with N.
Yeah. They're taller than us. Yes.
They're stronger than us. And
But we're still alive, so take that.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. I had like 6 thoughts, and I was able to control my
they were
impulse.
all horrible.
They were not appropriate for a good Christian podcast. I'm sorry, everyone.
Repent.
Yes.
Okay, so yes, so the knowing thing.
Yeah.
I think that's where it should go. I think that's what is being presented.
That's the only way I could think to preach it, to be honest with you. Right.
However, again, it's now saying that the children born of a couple that is in communion with the demonic is evil. And the children born in communion with God, Seth's line, is not.
But it would relate them to being given over to their desires, right? That there is something. Whether you would have to say it's extramarital. That would be one of the arguments.
And so the way I go with this is you have to tie this idea of the Nephilim as a introduction of what God later brings in as the idea of Satan's manipulation of nations.
Yeah.
And I think you're leaning into something there. You're totally trying to emphasize this point where Nephilim, as far as we Christians, after Christ's death and resurrection, should look at Nephilim and be concerned with them insofar as that they are theological concepts. We can recognize that something might have been going on historically, but that is not a primary concern. Just like we recognize that our primary focus when it comes to our salvation is on God. We also recognize, though, that demons are still a thing. They're still out there. They still have some relevancy, but that's not what we focus on. So when it comes
in the same way that when Jesus refers to the Pharisees as being sons of the devil and not the sons of Abraham, right? He's not saying they're not sons of Abraham. Of course they are. He's saying that as the children of Abraham are the ones that get the promise from God. They're not theologically present within the tree and they've been grafted out. They are sons of they're a part of the Satan's kingdom. They are rebels. They're not sheep. They're goats.
And so if we're talking about someone in our modern day context who finds a YouTube video about giants being unearthed in the Middle East and they go down this rabbit hole of the Nephilim, how do we, as a brother in Christ, how do we approach that person? Is it with correction? Is this just something we let happen? We let it run its course?
You have to step them through the long, arduous task of the Bible uses images to present theological points to people and places in time, and slowly presents the actual articulation of the idea through the whole articulated scripture. And that idea is called progressive revelation. So it starts off with an image, and it moves with a culture and a people, and it was written to them to present that idea, because the idea present in Genesis is telling you the same thing, that there's goats and there's sheep.
Yes. And as so far as what the Nephilim were in a historical sense, the Bible ultimately is not interested in providing an exhaustive answer that will satisfy everyone.
Yes. And that's the connection point between the idea of Satan manipulating nations to oppose God's people and the idea of the Nephilim is the conquest of Canaan.
Yeah.
God's people attacking, or God causing their hearts to harden so that they attack God's people. The nations opposing God's people through the influence of what? The demonic.
Yeah.
Creating the Nephilim. It's that same image of there's Satan's influence of people that are not within God's covenant people and God's covenant people. And the image for that time and in that place was the Nephilim. The image for the exile was the Babylonians. The image in Revelation was the beasts. Same within Daniel, right? You've got the kingdoms of the beasts, right? There's these images that are present to every people group that God is working throughout the Bible, and it's all presenting this idea. There's sheep and there's goats. Those people aren't going to get along, and one of them is God's.
And if someone's still fixated on the Nephilim because they have to have an answer, ultimately there has to be a recognition and the humility to come to a peace with the fact that no answer will have 100% certainty in their respect, unless you're just talking about the theological dimension of what the Nephilim is. In that case, it is absolutely sure what the Nephilim are. They are the sons of sin. They are the sons of the serpent. They are the sons of... Sorry, I shouldn't say sons of the serpent because that's got connotations there.
In the theological sense of what is their standing with God.
Yes. Yeah. If you are fixated on what they were historically, you have to make peace with the fact that you will not know. Anyone that says with absolute certainty is wrong, because they cannot say things with absolute certainty on that matter.
Well, because then you have to start coming up with a theory. Like, for example, one of my favorite theories is that, there was a bunch of those TV shows that were like, we found the bones of the giants in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Right. And then it just stopped. Mysteriously. Well, it's because the Smithsonian took all their bones, and then those are the dinosaur bones. And so the Smithsonian is doing a revisionist history.
That's
where
awesome.
all dinosaur bones are actually Nephilim bones.
That's so cool.
That they've reconstructed and then put like a crocodile head.
That's awesome.
I wish that was true. That's so cool.
But here's the thing. It's not built on a complete lie, because the Smithsonian has this weird knack of stealing people's bones.
But
this belongs in a museum. My museum.
And then one last thing is, be careful of people and sources that pull authority from things that are not the scripture, because as far as we as believers are concerned, the Nephilim exist within scripture. And that's where all the information that we are concerned with is found.
And you could never, for once, just like you could never say to somebody like a Christian struggling in their faith and go, yeah, that person's not saved. Just like you can never do that. You can never look at somebody and go, that's Nephilim, kill him.
Yep.
Yeah.
Never.
So, okay, let's have a fun, wild question then. Are there Nephilim still around? In whatever capacity they were historically before?
The historical thing, no, I don't think that happened.
No.
But theologically, yes.
Theologically, sure, okay.
I mean,
you want to say yes a little bit.
I want to say yes,
well,
right?
if you say yes, then it has to be the Dutch.
They are tall.
Just 'cause they're tall?
They're so tall.
And they're the Dutch right now are the best. Like the top 3 fighters in Muay Thai right now are Dutch. So they're good at fighting.
What the hell is Muay Thai?
Muay Thai is like is a Thai kickboxing.
That's cool.
Which makes sense. The long legs would be an advantage.
Yeah.
Especially over another Thai person. Anyways, we're not going to be like, hey, the next episode is we're going to figure out which race the Nephilim
No, but
are.
that's the problem.
That's terrible.
Now you're asking the question that I said is the conclusion of it if it actually happened.
I think they were tossed out of Canaan. I think that's what it was. I think it was the turn of the Bronze Age. The Iron Age came around, and being just real tall didn't help as much as being stabbed with a sword.
But do you think they were half angel, half human?
I don't think they were half and half anything, right? I think they were probably human in as much as they could be.
What if hypothetically?
So you're arguing that the Dutch could be Nephilim because they're tall?
I'm not arguing that.
No. Here's my argument. So the Anakim are being pushed to Gath, to Ashdod, to the
into
sea.
Greece. They go north into...
No. They get to the coast and they see that they have to leave. And so they get on some boats, they travel, and they travel really far. And they get passed through the Mediterranean, but they keep on going over the Atlantic. And then they arrive in the Americas.
The Nephilim are the Lamanites. Is that what we're going
the
with?
Nephilim are the faces on Mount Rushmore.
They're yes.
Yeah. Where do they go? And Enoch says they're 4,500 feet tall. Right? Which gives them a great advantage.
Is not the Bible.
They give them a great advantage to carve their faces into the Mount Rushmore. Doesn't give them a lot of means of reproducing. So, anyways, this has been my TED Talk.
But anyways, but another thing that points to like the idea of like, well, why do you need the theological image, right? Is because, well, we talked about the sons of God being the stars that guide people's lives, right? The Babylonian religion does the same thing, and then also you have today's the star signs.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
That's where they come
Astrology.
from.
Yeah.
Okay.
My argument is that people that obey star signs,
the
astrology, are the
Nephilim.
Nephilim.
Just like every white girl in the lower mainland of BC is a Nephilim. Sorry.
No.
Oh, whoops.
No,
If you read
so-
your horoscope this morning.
Literally, when we get to the discussion of the stars being the ruler, like guarding, like controlling people's lives, and then you've got the story of Job about the stars coming before God, the sons of God, and then you've got Satan, who
Right.
then is placed over this person and messes with them, which carries that same image. The idea then is God saying that no, those things that people are worshiping that messed with people to create these demon hybrids, right? No, they're completely under my sovereign control. So even if they do exist in the sense that we think about them, trying to present them literally, doesn't mean they're like able to oppose God in any way. And then that's where you get the idea of Satan manipulating nations. And then also Paul saying the authorities and the thrones and the rulers that are over reality and Christ is above them.
That's a beautiful organization of it. So let me propose one thing that's super not beautiful, and it's just a crackpot theory instead. Because I want you to have the good final word, and I'll have the bad final word.
Okay.
What if the Nephilim were part angel, part man, and then they all died out? And that's it.
It's possible we would find their bones.
Which they did in the Middle East. The Giants of Kandar. Suck an egg.
Is that what they did?
Giants of Kandar are like still around.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, cool.
Anyways, I'll go on a conspiracy tangent at the end. But
Do they have like triple helix DNA or something?
They must. There's no other way they could do that.
Call me a geologist.
Call me a geologist because this is triple helix.
I'm gonna have to bleep that out.
No, I'll just cut it out.
What was I gonna say? I'm my brain is broken. I have
Do you
no
think they're
thoughts.
like Prometheus?
No,
some
yes.
sort of demigod bringing culture to humanity, like some
no.
sort of
Did they-
alien.
Sorry,
Did they ingest black goop and then deteriorate into the waters?
Well, no, I want to get back to the Samuel stuff, is because then when you get into Samuel and you get into Saul, right? You get God. They said, we want a king like them. Well, all of their kings were Nephilim. They were giants, 16-foot tall people, right? How was Saul described? He was taller than everybody else. They wanted a Nephilim as a king.
Oh, that's an interesting way to frame
Right.
that. Okay.
And then,
So you're saying Saul was a Nephilim.
just wait, God is breaking down the Nephilim description in the story of Saul and David. Because what you see is somebody then who's what? Filled with the Spirit, right? Instead of the demonic.
Right.
He's filled with the Spirit and defeats the Amorites, the Ammonites, then goes to war with the Philistines. But then his spirit is taken from him and he doesn't have the courage to fight an actual Nephilim.
Oh, okay. All right. I see.
Yeah.
Right?
Like the matrix of leadership.
Yes, but,
Jews roll out.
But who does? This short kid
Who is a subversion of their idea.
of the Nephilim,
Right.
Who is actually a son of God, who redeems the Gittites, who redeems this image of what a king should be, as described by God. And he's saying, you have this idea that a king should be this tall, half demon, like son of a god. No.
Your king is kind of like a whiny boy sometimes that sings songs on his harp. He's cool though. You're gonna love him.
No, this image that you have is broken. This image that you have is not accurate to what is good leadership, what is a good person, what is a human, what is a representative of the thing that I made, because kings are images, again, of Adam, of what humanity is in the garden.
It's the right ordered image as opposed to the image that man can conceive, which is in line with.
What is the greatest man? It is a king that is a giant, that is a great warrior, a mighty hero.
Right.
And God is saying no.
Because it's not those things that actually matter. The real highest, the greatest man
is where his heart is.
Who has a heart after the Lord.
And a Nephilim is somebody who doesn't have a heart for the Lord.
That's beautiful. That's wonderful.
So the Nephilim are just antithetical to short kings. Anyways.
Wait,
is this the first?
What if the Nephilim with the dinosaurs? That's why the bones look like dinosaurs.
No.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, anyways.
I thought it was just because animals didn't die before the fall.
Guys, I think
chickens were able to grow to their full size. And that's where we get T-Rexes.
Oh, that's good.
Is the podcast ending?
It feels like it.
It's taking its natural course.
This was less chaotic than the Sin episode, which is good. Caleb will be happy.
Well, less hands in the kitchen make for cleaner work.
That is true. And I had to be responsible this time.
You tried to not be.
I have to have my moments.
The unnamed Egyptian Anunnaki built the pyramids. Thank you for listening to Second Rate Saints.
Well, how else do they carry the bricks?
Yeah, how else do you carry the bricks? It's so big, dude. It's like the size of a Boeing 747. So you got this yoked up demon king that can just chuck around in like Lincoln logs, and hell yeah, you got yourself a pyramid.
Just a guy does that, and then he says he's the king. You're gonna say, okay, sure, yeah.
The dude lifts 500 tons over his shoulder. You're worshiping.
Do you think someone was like, hey, what are you building that for? He goes, oh, it's a solar projector. He goes, yeah, sure, dude. Whatever. You're strong enough to lift up those bricks. We'll do whatever.
Do you think if like Dwayne The Rock Johnson went back to ancient Israel, they'd be like, that's
Are you arguing that Dwayne The Rock Johnson isn't? No.
Maybe.
No,
only when he's wearing the gold chain and the black turtleneck. That's what I think of.
No, in Scorpion King, he would have been.
Yeah?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay, if we're doing a live action adaptation
of the Scorpion King.
No, I was going to say of the Nephilim. No, this is terrible. Anyways, let's just move on.
I want Peter Dinklage to play one of them.
Peter Dinklage. Some of them are just really short too, okay?
Peter Dinklage and Hezbollah.
But they're both like, it got a perspective shift, so they're giants.
And then you got like Warwick Davies that makes a cameo in the end.
Oh, man.
Is that offensive? I don't know if that... It's funny though, so it's okay,
It's just
right?
Nephilim attacking, and then
Randy
Newman's short people is playing.
To 1,000 subscribers.
Oh man, I hope we don't get any subscribers from this one.
I think Caleb is going to actually appreciate this episode.
Guys, please chip in money to the Buy Me a Coffee so we can get Peter Dinklage on the podcast.
He says we need at least $5 to get him on.
Can that be one of our Patreon stretch goals? $4 million, get Peter Dinklage in for our movie about the gods of Egypt.
We call it Short King.
Okay, end the podcast.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for listening thus far. I hope that you've enjoyed our ramblings, and honestly, I think pretty informative episode on the Nephilim.
I think this is one of our most even-handed educational ones.
Maybe. Until now. Anyways, if you'd like to donate to the future of Second Rate Saints, check us at buymeacoffee.com/second-rate-saints. If you'd like to see everything we're doing online, go to www.secondratesaints.com. We've got a chat feature there. If you'd also like to just comment under our YouTube video, that also works. We got big plans for the future. We're not going to be any fallen heroes. We're still up and running. Usually this is when Caleb tells me to turn off the podcast. So that's what I've got so far.
Basically, my argument was...
Oh my goodness. I'm shutting down the
If
podcast.
you're a Nephilim, you're not...
What if you go to heaven and it's just Zach Galifianakis waiting for you?